In the heart of Seoul, where blood and loyalty bind Korea's most feared crime families, a black woman raises two children whose faces could destroy an empire. Valerie Yates never expected to see him again. The man from one impossible night, the stranger with the dangerous smile who disappeared into the Seoul rain. She built a life in the shadows, working double shifts, teaching her daughter resilience and her son gentleness, protecting them from a truth she barely understood herself. But secrets have a way of surfacing in a city built on power, where her son's eyes, sharp, unmistakable his eyes, meet the wrong gaze at the wrong moment. The carefully constructed wall between her quiet world and the Seon family's brutal empire begins to crack. And Seon Joon, the cold second son bound by blood, oaths, and tradition, sees in those children's faces a past he thought was buried, and a future that could cost them all everything. Seon Joon didn't do grocery stores. He had people for mundane tasks, assistants who anticipated needs before he voiced them, a world engineered to keep him insulated from the ordinary chaos of Seoul streets. But tonight he dismissed his driver after a meeting that left him restless, choosing to walk through the late evening crowds of Hongdae rather than return to the suffocating silence of the family estate. The noise, the anonymity, it was the closest thing to freedom a man with his last name could steal. He was cutting through the fluorescent bright aisles of a 24-hour mart, headed toward the exit when time stopped. She stood 3 aisles over, her back to him, dark curls escaping a loose bun as she bent to examine a price tag. There was something achingly familiar in the curve of her neck, the way she moved with quiet economy, and for one irrational moment his chest tightened with recognition he couldn't name. Then she straightened, and a little girl appeared at her side, deep brown skin, bright eyes that cut through the sterile lighting with unnerving clarity. The child tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing at something on a higher shelf, and the woman's face softened into a smile that hit June like a fist to his sternum. For years collapsed into nothing. The rain. Her laughter, breathless and unguarded. The hotel room where he'd broken every rule he'd ever lived by, where for 6 hours he'd been just a man, not a Seon, not a weapon being sharpened for his father's wars. He'd left before dawn because staying would have been dangerous, for her, for the fragile thing blooming between them, for the empire that demanded his absolute loyalty. He'd spent months trying to forget her name, and now she was here, in a grocery store in Hongdae, with a daughter whose eyes, his breath caught. Those eyes, sharp, watchful, unmistakably familiar because he saw them every morning in his own mirror. A toddler appeared then, squirming in a shopping cart, all soft curls and round cheeks, reaching for his mother with the pure trust of a child who'd never known fear. The woman, Valerie, her name was Valerie, he remembered now with painful clarity, scooped the boy up with practiced ease, murmuring something that made both children smile. June's world tilted. The girl was old enough. The boy's age fit the timeline, and their features, the particular architecture of their faces beneath the beautiful complexity of their mother's heritage. He saw echoes of his own bloodline staring back at him. It was impossible. It was undeniable. His hand found a shelf beside him for balance as his mind raced through calculations, probabilities, the catastrophic implications of what his gut already knew to be true. Valerie shifted the boy to her hip, took her daughter's hand, and moved toward the checkout counter, completely unaware that the man who'd vanished from her life was standing 15 feet away, watching his entire existence reshape itself around two children whose existence could destroy everything his family had built. He should walk away, disappear again, protect them through distance. But Seon Joon had never been good at letting go of things that belonged to him. And those children, his children, were already moving toward the exit. Joon didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse office overlooking the Han River, city lights bleeding into darkness, and made a single phone call to the only person he trusted with secrets that could end lives. Minwoo arrived within the hour. No questions, no judgment, just the steady competence of a man who'd covered Joon's tracks since their university days and had since become his most valuable asset. He listened in silence as Joon described what he'd seen, What he suspected, the ticking bomb of children who carried his face in a city controlled by his family's brutal code. Find out everything, Joon said quietly. Where she works, how she survives, why she's here. And Minwoo, no one else can know. Not my brother, not my father. No one. And if you're right about the children, then I need proof before this becomes a weapon someone else can use. Minwoo nodded once and disappeared into the night, leaving Joon alone with the weight of what he was about to confirm. The investigation took 3 days. Valerie Yates, American, overstayed tourist visa, converted to a precarious work permit, teaching English for barely enough to cover rent in Mapogu. No family in Korea, no support network, medical bills piling up for the boy. Marcus, who'd been sick recently, nothing serious but enough to drain her meager savings. Joon read the report twice, each detail another indictment of his absence. She'd been struggling alone while he'd been playing his role in the family's empire, ignorant of the life he'd created in one reckless, perfect night. Getting the DNA sample required a different kind of precision. He found them at a small playground near her apartment on a Saturday morning, engineered the encounter with the practiced ease of a man trained in manipulation. A stumble near the bench where Valerie sat watching her children, an apology, a brief conversation where he played the role of a curious local charmed by her children's laughter. Marcus dropped his juice box. Joon picked it up with a smile, handed it back to the boy's chubby fingers, and pocketed a second identical box he'd brought for exactly this purpose. The whole interaction lasted 90 seconds. Valerie's eyes lingered on him for a moment, something flickering in her expression, recognition dancing at the edge of memory. But then Marcus called for her, and the moment passed. Joon walked away with his heart hammering against his ribs. That afternoon, Minwoo hand-delivered the sample to a private lab owned by a doctor whose loyalty had been purchased years ago. Results in 48 hours, complete discretion guaranteed. That night, Valerie came home to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside, 10 million won in untraceable cash and a receipt showing Marcus's medical bills had been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. No name, no note, no way to trace it back. She stood in her tiny kitchen holding the money with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face, terrified and grateful in equal measure. 3 floors below, sitting in a car with tinted windows, Joon watched her apartment window and waited for the truth that would change everything. The envelope arrived at dawn, delivered by Minwoo himself rather than trusted to any courier. Joon took it with steady hands that betrayed none of the chaos roaring beneath his skin, dismissed his friend with a nod, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that suddenly felt fragile. He didn't open it immediately. Once he broke that seal, once he saw the results printed in clinical certainty, there would be no going back. The careful architecture of his life, the dutiful son, the calculated strategist, the man who'd buried every weakness his father's world couldn't tolerate, would collapse under the weight of 2 children he'd never known existed. His hand trembled as he tore the envelope open. The words blurred together at first, medical terminology and percentage probabilities, until his eyes found the only line that mattered: probability of paternity, 99.97%. The paper slipped from his fingers. He was a father, not in some abstract possibility he could dismiss or investigate further, but in the absolute, undeniable truth that reordered everything he thought he knew about himself. Those children, Amara with her watchful eyes, Marcus with his innocent smile, were his. His blood, his responsibility, is to protect in a world that would devour them the moment the truth surfaced. And Valerie. God, Valerie. The woman he'd convinced himself was a beautiful mistake, a moment of weakness he'd successfully compartmentalized, had been raising his children alone in a city that showed her no mercy. She'd struggled through pregnancies, sleepless nights, medical emergencies, the exhausting weight of single motherhood, while he'd attended family banquets and negotiated territory agreements and prepared to marry a woman chosen for her pedigree. The shame was acid in his throat. He stood there as the sun rose over Seoul, light bleeding across the Han River, and felt the full magnitude of what he'd done and what he now faced. Because the Seon family code wasn't just tradition. It was survival, bloodline purity, carefully arranged marriages, legitimate heirs raised within the fold. These weren't suggestions. They were the pillars holding up an empire built on absolute control. His father would see the children as contamination, a scandal to be buried, eliminated, erased before it could weaken the family's position. The other families would smell blood in the water, use the revelation to challenge the Seon's authority. And Mina, his arranged fiancée, would turn this into a weapon that could destroy them all. If the truth came out now, uncontrolled and unprotected, Valerie and the children wouldn't survive it. Joon pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over Minwoo's number, then stopped. Every call could be monitored, every action tracked. His father's network was vast, and paranoia was the price of power. He deleted the message he'd started to type and instead burned the DNA report in his fireplace, watching the evidence curl into ash. The truth was confirmed, but it would remain his secret, locked behind the same iron discipline that had made him valuable to his family, until he could figure out how to protect them from the very empire he'd been born to inherit. Outside, Seoul awakened, beautiful and merciless, unaware that everything had changed. Mina wasn't stupid. She'd been raised in the same ruthless world as Joon, taught to read power dynamics before she could read Hangul, trained to see weakness as opportunity. And Seon Joon, her perfectly controlled fiancé who treated their engagement like a business merger, had been acting strange for 2 weeks. The missed dinners she could dismiss. The distracted silences during family gatherings were almost expected from a man who wore coldness like armor. But the way he'd looked through her at last week's charity gala, the private phone calls he took in empty hallways, the driver he'd dismissed in Hongdae for no reason. These were cracks in a facade that had never shown flaws before. Mina didn't tolerate uncertainty, so she'd hired someone to provide answers. The investigator was expensive, discreet, and thorough, exactly what money could buy when you came from a family nearly as powerful as the Seons. The photos arrived in an unmarked folder delivered to her private office, and Mina spread them across her desk with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a wound. Joon outside a grocery store in Hongdae, his attention fixed on something inside. Joon sitting in a parked car, watching a rundown apartment building. And then the images that made her breath catch. A black woman with 2 young children, caught in clear detail as they walked to a playground, entered a school, lived their insignificant little lives in a part of Seoul that people like Mina never visited. The investigator's notes were precise. Astra's subject observed targets on multiple occasions. Maintains distance, but shows heightened interest. Children appear to be mixed race, approximately 6 years and 3 years old. Asterisk. Mina's mind moved through the calculations with ruthless speed. The timeline fit. The secrecy made sense. And if those children were what she suspected, then Seon Joon had just handed her the leverage to renegotiate every term of their carefully arranged future. She smiled, slipped the photos into her purse, and made a call to someone who specialized in a different kind of investigation. Valerie knew something was wrong the moment she opened her apartment door. Nothing obvious, no overturned furniture, no ransacked drawers, just the subtle wrongness of objects slightly displaced, the faint smell of unfamiliar perfume lingering in air that should have been stale from a day's absence. Her heart hammered as she checked the children's room first. Amara and Marcus were at her neighbor's apartment. Safe, thank God. But someone had been here, in her home, near her children. She moved through the small space with growing dread, cataloging what might be missing. Her laptop was untouched. The meager cash she kept hidden in a coffee tin remained. Even her passport sat undisturbed in the drawer where she kept important documents. Then she opened the small wooden box on her dresser, the one place she allowed herself to keep something purely sentimental, and her blood turned to ice. The hotel key card was gone. The single memento from that impossible night 4 years ago. The plastic rectangle she'd kept because it was the only proof that he'd been real, that those hours had existed outside her imagination. It was such a small thing, meaningless to anyone else. but someone had known exactly what to take. Valerie sank onto her bed, hands shaking, as the walls of her carefully constructed invisibility crumbled around her. Someone knew. Someone had been watching. And whoever they were, they just sent a message she couldn't ignore. She was no longer hidden, and her children were no longer safe. June knew about the break-in before Valerie did. Min Woo's surveillance team had flagged the intrusion within minutes. A professional job, no forced entry, someone with resources and motivation. And when the report identified the stolen item as a hotel keycard from 4 years ago, June felt the noose tightening around all of them. Mina. It had to be. Only someone inside his circle would connect those dots. And his fiancée had been watching him with the predatory focus of a woman who smelled blood. He had hours, maybe less, before she made her move. The call to Valerie came from an unknown number at 11 p.m. She answered with the cautious suspicion of someone who'd just discovered her sanctuary had been violated, her voice barely above a whisper so she wouldn't wake the children sleeping in the next room. "It's me," June said, and he heard her sharp intake of breath. "Don't say my name. Just listen. You're not safe there anymore. Someone knows about you, about the children. I'm sending a car in 20 minutes. Pack only what you need." "I don't. Who is this? How did you?" "You know who I am, Valerie." His voice dropped, intimate and urgent in a way that bridged 4 years of silence. "And I know about Amara and Marcus. I know everything. And I'm asking you to trust me one more time." The silence stretched between them, loaded with history and fear and the weight of impossible choices. "Why now?" she finally whispered. "You left. You disappeared. I didn't know." The words came out rawer than he intended. "I swear to God, I didn't know. But I do now, and I will protect them. I will protect all of you. But you have to move. Tonight." 23 minutes later, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up outside her building. Min Woo himself emerged, his face carefully neutral as he helped the terrified Valerie load 2 sleepy children and 3 hastily packed bags into the car. They drove through Seoul's nighttime streets to a private residence in Songbuk-dong, old money neighborhood, high walls, the kind of place that didn't appear on any public records. June was waiting inside, and when Valerie saw him in full light for the first time in 4 years, her eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall. He looked at his children, really looked at them, seeing himself in Amara's sharp gaze and Marcus's sleepy confusion, and something fundamental shifted in his chest. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tonight, you're safe." The next morning, June walked into the family estate's formal dining room, where his father sat reading reports over breakfast. He didn't sit, didn't wait for acknowledgement. "I'm postponing the engagement to Mina," he announced. "Indefinitely." The chairman's eyes lifted slowly, cold as winter stone. "Explain." "Personal reasons. The family will weather the scandal. You don't make decisions that affect this family's standing without my approval." June met his father's gaze with the same iron will that had been beaten into him since childhood. "I just did." He walked out before the chairman could respond, knowing he'd just declared war on everything his father had built, and that there was no turning back now. Mina had been planning this for 3 days, waiting for the perfect stage. When her investigators reported that Valerie had emerged from wherever June had hidden her to take the children to the Latte World Tower, probably the girl's birthday, how touching. She knew the moment had arrived. The luxury shopping atrium was perfect. Glass and marble, high-end boutiques, the kind of place where Seoul's elite came to see and be seen. Afternoon light poured through the soaring windows, and enough people milled about with shopping bags and expensive coffee to guarantee an audience. Valerie was browsing a window display with Amara when Mina approached, flanked by 2 impeccably dressed friends who'd been briefed on their roles. She'd worn white, innocent, wronged, sympathetic, and her voice carried just enough to turn heads. "Oh my God, you're her, aren't you?" The American woman. Mina's Korean was crystal clear, designed to exclude Valerie from any nuance while including everyone around them in the performance. Valerie turned slowly, Marcus on her hip, and Mina watched recognition flicker across her face. The other woman, the fiancée, understanding and dread arrived in the same heartbeat. "I don't want any trouble," Valerie said quietly in careful Korean, already positioning herself between Mina and her children. Trouble. Mina laughed, bright and cruel. You are the trouble. Coming here, to our country, trapping a man with your... She gestured vaguely at Valerie's body, her skin, exotic appeal, and then hiding these children like some shameful secret. The atrium was going quiet now, phones emerging from pockets, the particular silence that preceded viral moments. Look at them, Mina continued, her voice dripping with theatrical pity. Those poor mixed children. Do you know what you've done to them? They'll never belong here. Not really. Not with that skin, that hair. You've condemned them to living between worlds because you couldn't keep your legs. Stop. Valerie's voice cut through the performance, low and steady and filled with a dignity that made Mina's theatrical cruelty look exactly like what it was. You can say what you want about me, but you will not speak about my children. Your children. Mina's smile sharpened. Is that what you call them? When everyone knows you use them to trap a man worth billions. What kind of mother drags her bastards across the world to? Mom, I'm recording. Amara said clearly in English, her phone raised, her 6-year-old face set with a composure that silenced the crowd. Like you taught me. When someone's being a bully, we document it. Mina's smile faltered. Valerie adjusted Marcus on her hip, took Amara's free hand, and looked directly at Mina with eyes that had survived worse than a rich woman's tantrum. We're leaving now, and when a man you think you own sees how you spoke about his children, you'll understand exactly what you've lost. She walked away with her head high, her children close, through a crowd that parted in stunned silence. Behind her, Mina stood frozen in her white outfit, surrounded by recording phones, her perfectly planned humiliation transforming into something else entirely. The video was trending within an hour. Joon was in a meeting with his father's lieutenants when Min Woo's text arrived. Mina confronted them at Latte. It's already online. He was out the door before anyone could object, the video playing on his phone as his driver cut through Seoul traffic with controlled urgency. 30 seconds in, watching Mina mock his children's skin, their existence, Valerie's dignity under assault, while strangers watched like it was entertainment. Something cold and furious calcified in his chest. By the time he reached Latte World Tower, the video had 500,000 views. He found Mina exactly where he expected, still in the atrium, surrounded by her friends, performing damage control for the cameras that hadn't stopped recording. She looked up as he approached, relief flooding her face. Joon, thank God. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just... His hand shot up, silencing her with a gesture that made her flinch. When he spoke, his voice carried through the atrium with the absolute authority of a man who'd been raised to command empires. You will issue a public apology within the hour. You will specifically apologize to Valerie Yates and to my children for your racist verbal assault. He watched her face drain of color. And then you'll have your family release a statement confirming that our engagement is permanently dissolved due to your conduct unbecoming of the Seon family standards. Your children, Mina's voice cracked. You're actually claiming those. Choose your next words very carefully. The warning in his tone made several onlookers step back. Because I'm claiming them. Publicly. And anyone who speaks about my daughter and my son the way you just did will discover exactly how unforgiving I can be. He turned to the mall's general manager, who'd appeared with security, looking panicked. This establishment allowed one of my family members to be harassed on your premises while your staff did nothing. I expect Latte Group's executive leadership will want to discuss how they plan to address this failure before the Seon family reevaluates our considerable retail partnerships. The manager's face went pale. Mr. Seon, I assure you, you have until tomorrow. Joon's attention shifted back to Mina. As for you, if I see you within 100 meters of Valerie or my children ever again, you'll discover that my father's methods aren't the only ones this family knows how to employ. Do we understand each other? Mina's hands were shaking. Around them, phones captured every word, every angle. The video that would go viral within minutes wasn't just her humiliation of Valerie anymore. It was Joon's complete and public decimation of the woman his family had chosen for him. The apology, he repeated coldly. 1 hour. He walked away without waiting for a response, pulling out his phone to call Minwoo. Where is she? Safe house in Songbuk-dong. She's shaken but holding it together. I'm on my way. Jun paused as his driver opened the car door. And Minwoo, prepare a statement. We're making this official before my father hears it from anyone else. I want DNA documentation, legal recognition, everything ironclad by morning. That's going to cause. I know exactly what it's going to cause. Jun slid into the car, watching Seoul blur past the tinted windows. But they came from my family. And now everyone's going to learn what that costs. The annual Seon family banquet wasn't merely a dinner. It was a display of power. 300 guests packed the Grand Hyatt's ballroom. Every major family represented, politicians and business leaders mingling under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The chairman presided from the head table like an emperor, his sons flanking him in a carefully choreographed show of unity. Except tonight, Seon Joon had brought gasoline to his father's carefully constructed empire. The confrontation with Mina had bought him 3 days. 3 days of viral videos. Think pieces about racism in Korea's elite circles and his father's ominous silence. The chairman had summoned him twice. Joon had ignored both calls. Instead, he'd spent those days with lawyers, preparing documentation that couldn't be disputed or buried. And he'd spent them with Valerie, watching her transform from a woman in hiding to a mother ready to fight for her children's place in a world that had tried to erase them. Now she sat at a table near the back of the ballroom, deliberately placed where she could see everything but be easily overlooked. Amara and Marcus were with Minwoo's sister at the safe house. This was about to get ugly, and Jun wouldn't risk them witnessing what came next. The chairman rose for his traditional speech, commanding instant silence. He spoke of legacy, loyalty, the strength of blood ties that had built their empire across generations. His eyes found Jun's across the ballroom, a warning, a final chance to fall in line. Jun stood instead. The ballroom went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with respect and everything to do with shock. You didn't interrupt the chairman. Ever. Father, honored guests. Jun's voice carried without microphones, trained from childhood to command attention. I have an announcement that affects this family's future. The chairman's expression could have frozen the Han River. Sit down. I have 2 children. Jun continued as if his father hadn't spoken, the words landing like grenades across the ballroom. A daughter, Amara, age 6. A son, Marcus, age 3. Their mother is Valerie Yates, an American woman I met 4 years ago, and I have DNA documentation confirming paternity beyond any doubt. The explosion of whispers was immediate. Phones emerged. Heads turned toward Valerie, who sat motionless, her dignity intact even as 300 pairs of eyes dissected her presence. This is not the venue, the chairman started, his voice lethal. This is exactly the venue. Jun cut him off, the ultimate act of defiance. Because this family's code demands blood purity, legitimate heirs, carefully controlled lineages. And I'm here to say that code ends with me. My children are legitimate because I claim them. Their mother deserves respect, not whispers and shame. You will not dictate. I already have. Jun pulled the documentation from his jacket, holding it up. Legal paternity established. Financial provisions secured. They are Seon's, whether this family accepts them or not. The chairman rose, fury radiating from him like heat. You've destroyed everything with this reckless. No. Valerie's voice cut through the chaos, and every head swiveled toward her as she stood. She walked forward with the steady grace of a woman who'd survived worse than their judgment, stopping beside Jun. He's protected everything that matters. And I'm not here asking for your pity or your acceptance. I'm telling you that my children exist. They're brilliant and beautiful, and they deserve better than your shame. She looked directly at the chairman. So you can accept them as family, or you could be the grandfather who chose pride over his own blood. But either way, we're not disappearing. The ballroom held its breath. The chairman stared at his son, at the woman who'd just challenged his absolute authority in front of everyone who mattered, at the fracture spreading through the foundation of everything he'd built. This conversation, he said quietly, each word edged with barely contained rage, is not finished. But his authority, for the first time in decades, had been publicly challenged, and he hadn't crushed it. The safe house in Songbuk-dong became their world for 2 weeks while Seoul's elite tore itself apart debating the scandal. Joon's phone never stopped. Threats from traditionalists, opportunistic overtures from rival families sensing weakness, lawyers managing the legal fallout. But every morning he woke to the sound of Marcus's laughter in the kitchen and Amara's questions over breakfast, and the chaos felt manageable. Valerie watched him navigate fatherhood with the careful intensity he brought to everything, learning how Amara liked her toast, the specific way Marcus needed to be held when he was tired, the bedtime routines that made them feel safe. He was awkward at first, a man accustomed to control, struggling with the beautiful unpredictability of children. But he showed up every morning, every night, present in a way that made Valerie's carefully constructed walls begin to crack. "You don't have to do this," she told him one night after the children were asleep, both of them sitting in the dim living room with the weight of everything unsaid between them. "Claim them publicly, fight your whole family. You could have just provided for them quietly, protected us from a distance." Joon looked at her with those sharp eyes that Amara had inherited. "Is that what you want? For me to love my children in secret while your life stays small and hidden? I want to know why." Her voice broke slightly. "Why now? Why burn down your entire world for us?" "Because they're mine." The words were simple, absolute. "And so are you. I was a coward 4 years ago. I left because staying would have been complicated, because I had responsibilities and a path already chosen. But I think about who I would have been if I'd stayed, if I'd known." He reached for her hand, his touch careful, asking permission. "I can't get those years back, but I can make sure you never have to hide again." The chairman's summons came on a gray morning, delivered by formal courier. Not a request, a command. Joon went alone to the family estate, prepared for war. His father sat in the study where Joon had received countless lectures about duty and sacrifice, looking older somehow, the absolute certainty that had defined him slightly diminished. "The family has deliberated," the chairman said finally. "Your children will be acknowledged. Legitimate heirs with all associated protections and responsibilities." Joon waited. There was always a condition. "But the woman—" "Valerie," Joon corrected quietly. "Her name is Valerie, and she's not negotiable." The chairman's jaw tightened. "She will never be fully accepted. You understand this. Then the family will learn to live with my disappointment in them." Joon met his father's gaze without flinching. "Because I'm not asking permission anymore. I'm informing you how this will be." For a long moment, the chairman said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't warmth. But it was acknowledgement, the first crack in an empire built on absolute control. Joon returned to Songbuk-dong as the sun set over Seoul, finding Valerie reading to the children in the living room. Amara looked up first, her bright eyes questioning. "We can stay," she asked in her clear, direct way. Joon knelt beside them, pulling his daughter close, ruffling Marcus's soft curls. "We can stay. All of us. Together." Valerie's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for 4 years. Relief and fear and something that looked dangerously like hope. "It won't be easy," Joon said quietly, reaching for her hand. "My family, the attention, the people who will never stop judging. But I promise you, I will shield you from the worst of it. I will fight every code, every tradition that tries to diminish what we are." "And what are we?" Valerie whispered. He looked at his children, at the woman who'd raised them alone with nothing but courage, at the fragile, impossible family he'd found in a grocery store in Hongdae. "We're the beginning of something different," he said. "And I'm never walking away again." Outside, Seoul glittered in the darkness, beautiful and merciless as ever. But inside, for the first time, they were home.